For me, okay, there's two things, okay? There's the modern day analytics and how you look at a ball player, which you cannot ignore. A lot of it's very interesting, a lot of it's fascinating. But for me, there's also, it goes hand in hand with what I call the eye test, okay? I often say at times, I can tell you if I like a guy by the way he walks on and off the bus.
Welcome to Sports Business Unplugged, where the real game happens off the field. No fluff, no filters, just raw, uncut stories from the pros shaping the industry. Their journeys, their challenges, their passion, straight from the source. Let's talk sports business.
All right, guys, welcome to Sports Business Unplugged. This is the show where we dive into all things sports business, from big deals and career journeys to the untold stories behind the industry's biggest names. Today's guest is Jeff Borris. He's a longtime MLB agent, current senior agent and general counsel at the Ballparks Group. And over his career, he's negotiated over $1 billion in contracts, represented legends like Barry Bonds and Ricky Henderson, and built a reputation as one of the most experienced voices in salary arbitration and player advocacy. Simply put, Jeff has seen it all in the business of baseball. Hey, Jeff, how are you doing?
Good, Andrew. Thanks for having me on your show.
Thank you. I just want to start off talking about how you got into the industry. What did you just get shoved into the industry? Did you meet someone that, gave you a knack for it, or did you always know you wanted to be an agent?
Oh, I never knew I wanted to be an agent. The only thing I ever wanted to do was to be a professional baseball player. But when I got to be about 17 years old or so, I knew that wasn't going to happen. So it was during my first year of law school, which was in the second semester, my Easter break, 1986. I went down to spring training to recruit some players, and I guess I ended up being in the right place at the right time, because two of the guys that I ended up getting were Jose Canseco, who was the American League Rookie of the Year, and Mark Grace, who was third in the voting in the National League Rookie of the Year, and I was on my way.
Did those players motivate you in your early days, and how did you realize that you were good at what you did?
Now, those players didn't really motivate me. I was self-motivated. I mean, I didn't really grow up with any money or anything like that. I knew I had to carve my own path in life, and I was pretty much determined. And I saw an opportunity that laid in front of me, that if I worked really hard and I recruited a lot of guys, the right guys, and those guys did well and they performed well on the field, they would make a lot of money and I could make money off them. So I was really self-motivated. I didn't need the players to motivate me.
You came in as an intern, and you made your way to the top of the industry and of the company that you were working for. How did you hold yourself as an intern as opposed to how you hold yourself now? And what did you people that you were talking to think of you when you first came in?
Well, that's a good question, because it was a little difficult. I was in my first year of law school and I was only 23 years old. And a lot of the players that I was going after, they were 26, 27, 28 years old. They were actually older than me. So I don't want to say I was intimidated, because I wasn't, but it was, a little hard trying to talk to some guy who's 4 or 5 years older than myself and persuade them and convince them that I should be the one guiding them in their career. I should be the one negotiating their contract. So it was a little difficult at first, but soon after that, it didn't really matter. And as time went on, I got older, and as the players got younger, and now I actually end up representing some of my players' children that I represented, guys that I represented. Yeah, I represent their children today. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, what do you think is the most rewarding part of your job?
The thing that I like the most, believe it or not, and somebody just asked me this question the other day, is I like it. There's something special when a kid gets called up to the major leagues for the first time. It's different in the NBA and it's different in the NFL, because baseball is really a developmental sport, and it takes longer to get to the major leagues than it does. I mean, football, whether there's 6 or 7 rounds, the NBA, there's 2 rounds. So those guys are on the cusp of making it to the major league level in their respective sports. But in baseball, even the first rounders, only 30% of them or so even make it to the major leagues. And it usually takes them several years, if ever, to get there. So it's a very special moment, and I like to share when a player actually gets called to the major leagues for his first time. That's the most rewarding part of the job.
Do you still remember when your first player that you represented got called up to the major leagues?
Well, the first player that I represented was already in the major leagues.
Yeah.
As I said, Canseco and Grace, they were rookies in the major leagues. But I've represented probably thousands of guys that it's happened to, so I've gotten to go through the experience quite a few times. But it's never enough. I mean, I never get tired of it. It's never enough. I always get thrilled when a guy calls me up and says, "Hey, I just got called up. I'm going to the big leagues."
How do you handle, you know, problems or things that come up differently with let's say a 17 or 18-year-old versus a 35-year-old and or 30-year-old in the major leagues?
Well, there's players have different sets of problems along the way. I mean, as somebody who's 18 years old is, if he turns pro, he's obviously he's coming out of a high school and he's very highly regarded and he's drafted. His life situation is different than a 35-year-old who's probably on the back end of a long major league career and is thinking about post-career opportunities, what he's going to do, with the rest of his life because he's still a young man at 35, got a lot of working years ahead of him, irrespective of
Hmm.
how much money he might have made. It's kind of case by case basis, depending upon who the player is, what his age is, what level of success he's achieved, how much money he's made. You got to look at the totality of the circumstances before you can make a decision.
Is there kind of a big moment or a behind the scenes moment from your career that people haven't heard before? Maybe, a moment when a client was, taught you a life lesson or just something that you can think of that stands out?
Yeah, I can tell you that, I always have a very fine line about being, you can't be a fan when you're in this business, although in my heart, I love the sport. I have always loved the sport. But the night that Bonds broke Hank Aaron's record was a very special night for me because he took me on down into the field and into the clubhouse and shared the moment with me. And I was thinking to myself, wow, he wasn't my client and I wasn't his agent. He was sharing the moment with me, a historic
Yeah.
moment. I mean,
Yeah.
love him, hate him, the controversy surrounding him to me doesn't matter. I mean, that was real, and I felt like he was sharing a moment in history with me, and it was a very special moment for me in my career. And obviously, I don't think probably anything will ever come
Yeah.
close to that, no matter what. And I've had a
Yeah.
lot. Believe me, I've had a lot of special moments, but that one reigned supreme out of all the others.
Hmm. And you were with Bonds, through the highest highs and the lowest lows. How do you handle the kind of pressure or like the scrutiny of representing somebody that's so polarizing, during the controversy and all those type of things?
Well, you have to just meet things head on. A lot of things that came his way were grossly unfair, but nevertheless, I don't believe in being a coward or not meeting your problems head on. So we faced those problems as they came head on, and we dealt with the issues as they were. As I always say, right is always right and wrong is always wrong. And you just let the chips fall where they fall.
Was there ever a moment where you had to push back on Barry or the teams for his sake? And did that teach you anything about loyalty or conviction?
Well, nothing as it relates to Barry, but you learn a lot about loyalty in this business because agents or players change their agents like they change their shorts, right? When I always say to people, if you look at the divorce rate in the United States, it's about 50%. That's a fact. And of the
Hmm.
50% that stay together, probably half of those marriages are bad. So that means that 3 out of 4 marriages are bad. And if a marriage is the most sanctimonious of all relationships, right? What makes you think that a player and an agent, if the player, let's say, has a 10-year plus career, long career, he's going to stay with one agent like somebody stays with one wife or one husband, right? The divorce rate amongst agents and players is very high. But I like to think that although I've been through divorces with my players, okay, I would like to say that I haven't had my fair share. I've had a minuscule amount.
Okay. Is there when Bonds was kind of, I guess, blackballed from MLB back in 2007, you offered him to teams at the league minimum, but nobody took it. Was was there a point there where you where it sunk in that his playing days were truly over? And how did you kind of cope with that professionally or personally?
Okay, that's probably something that I've struggled with more than anything else in my career, and I'm going to tell you why. Okay, first of all, when I couldn't get Bonds a job at the minimum salary, it was just glaring and blatant that he was being blackballed out of Major League Baseball. I believe that if Bonds would have continued, I mean, if you look at him today as a 61-year-old man, you would think that he could put on a uniform and suit up and run out
Yeah,
there and play right now. Okay, I think that if he would have been allowed to continue to play, he probably would have hit 1,000 home runs. And I'm not, exaggerating by any means. I truly, in my heart of hearts, believe that. But they stole his career away from him because he was obviously the poster boy for the steroid era, and they wanted Major League Baseball wanted to turn the page on that era, and who better to do it with than Bonds? He got the home run record when he broke Hank Aaron's record, and there's nothing left to do. So they, believe me, it was behind the scenes. I mean, we filed our lawsuit and we lost our lawsuit because I didn't have that smoking gun, that piece of evidence where I didn't have a letter from the commissioner that said, do not hire Bonds no matter what. And he sent it out to all the general managers. I didn't
yeah,
have that piece of evidence.
yeah,
But when I call up 30 general managers and I say, here's Bonds, and he was an all-star in his last year. He led the league in OPS. I mean, he had some staggering numbers in his very final season, and I couldn't get him a job, and I couldn't get him a job at the minimum salary. It was despicable, okay, and criminal. And Major League Baseball should pay for that, and they got away with it. They're very smug and arrogant with their power, the way they conduct themselves, and they robbed this man of his career at the tail end of his career. Which, like I said, who knows? Maybe it could have been 3, 4, 5 more years. I don't
yep,
know, but they
yep,
definitely robbed him of that.
yeah. So obviously, you believe that there was some collusion at play,
A
but
hundred percent.
how did that experience kind of shape your view of the business side of baseball?
Well, I before the Bonds incident, I have been an agent for quite a long time, and I've lived through several collusion episodes. The most glaring one was the original collusion trials, which were from years 1986 through 1989. It was determined that Major League Baseball conspired to hold wages down amongst each other. The clubs had agreements. For instance, some of the famous cases were like Andre Dawson. He actually turned a blank check to the Cubs and said he was the MVP and said, fill in the amount I'll play for, because other teams wouldn't bid on him in a free market, in an open free market. Uh, you're not going to get 30 identical offers. You're going to get competitive bidding, which is how America operates in any industry, not just professional sports. It doesn't matter what it is that you do for a living. That's how it operates. But during those years, they didn't. And Major League and the Players Union, they sued Major League Baseball. They won. There was a settlement, $280 million that was paid into a fund that was distributed amongst the players. But that was only the first time these guys got caught. Okay, they've been caught again. Okay, and again, and now I want to tip my cap to major league owners because they still do it. They're just more sophisticated about how they go
Right.
about it. Okay, they're smarter. They've learned through as time has gone on. Hey, look, we still need to do this. We just have to be smart about how we go about our business. So that's what teams. It still goes on to this day. Like I said, the owners are arrogant. They're smug with power. They're not afraid to flex their muscle, and they've exploited talent historically, at least during my 39 years of being an agent. But my sense is it's been going on for 100 years prior to me becoming an agent.
Is it possible to find a solution or for it to be stopped or no?
Yeah, I actually wrote an article several years ago about how we can actually do away with the owners because what do they own? Think about it. The owners own the rights to the players. In a sense, it's slavery with wages, right? They own the. So now, let's imagine a scenario where there were no owners, okay? You have the Los Angeles Dodgers. You could have the Dodgers, but they're not owned by the Dodgers. You call them whatever you want. Same group of guys playing. You still have Otani and Freeman and Kershaw. You still have all these guys, but they're playing now. Who do you go to see? Do you go to see the Dodgers or do you go to see Otani play? Who do you go to watch? Or do you go to watch the grass grow, or do you go to get a beer and a hot dog? I believe that we could do away with the owners. They're just unnecessary middlemen. Okay, we could just coordinate teams, the same teams, call them by a different name, You might have a problem finding places to play, but that's okay. We could rent Dodger Stadium from the Dodgers. We could rent it from them
Mm-hmm.
and any other venues and do away with the Dodgers. There'd be more money in there for the players as well because you don't have to pay the owners, who, by the way, also historically claim poverty. They all claim that they don't make any money anyway.
Do you think that that solution like would ever reasonably happen or no?
No, I don't think it would happen, but there's been times during work stoppages, usually when the owners lock out, although the players have gone on strike before. And actually, the next one coming up is they'll play baseball all of this year, 2025, and all of next year, 2026. But then the collective bargaining agreement expires, and so there could be a lockout. Everybody thinks there's going to be a lockout. So, when my opinion is, once the owners lock out, say, okay, fine, you can lock the doors. We're all going to go play some other place.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we don't need you anymore. Now we might need, like I said, need to rent places, okay, to go play, but go ahead, lock us out permanently and let them, in a sense, throw their own or carve their own death sentence, right? Lock them out, fine, and let all the players go and then form their own leagues. And I just don't think this has to happen in baseball. I think it could happen in any major sport. Probably the most simplistic one to do it in would be basketball because you have less players, you have less equipment, there's more venues to play. I think it probably would be easier accomplished in basketball than any other sport.
Do you think that the owners are just too greedy for any type of solution to happen?
Yes, the owners are very greedy. They're white collar criminals. And I believe that they've engaged in this type of behavior with a sense of entitlement. And nobody at any point in time has ever been able to shake them of that. And I believe they'll continue to do business that way. Although the Players Union in Major League Baseball is the best union in all the sports, they're the gold standard. And through, since the unions came into existence, they have battled the major league owners, and the rights of the major league players are light years ahead of players in other sports.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you? I want to talk a little bit about back to what you do, and is there a moment that you can think of that was just the most high pressure moment of your career in terms of trying to get a deal signed?
Uh, Pressure, probably the most pressure I think I felt would have been uh, when I argued my first arbitration case by myself. I had been in arbitration hearings, I had written briefs, but I had never spoken inside the arbitration room. I've never advocated. I mean, for real. I mean, practicing, yes, doing it in the office, little vignettes here and there about certain aspects about a case, but I never presented a case by myself.
Mm-hmm.
So the first case that I did, I was 30 years old. It was Glenn Braggs. He was a player at the time with the Cincinnati Reds. He actually ended up marrying a girl named Cindy Herron, who was with the group In Vogue. You're probably too young to remember that group, but it was a very big, popular group at the time. They got married. And so it was the first time I did a case all by myself. And so I felt a lot of pressure, but I knew I was ready. Lost the case. I think I probably deserved to lose the case, not because of my performance, but because I remember Braggs had an injury. I want to say it was in August, and he never came back. And although I had in the case, I had statements from the doctor saying that he was ready, willing and able to resume, on first day of spring training, all activities, and he should not be inhibited in any way. The fact of the matter is until you've gotten back to the big leagues again, okay, there's always that cloud over you. They're always not sure. And so I think that kind of put a dagger in my heart in that case. But nevertheless, I remain accountable. We lost the case, and Braggs was very complimentary of the performance of it, the experience. I think it just made me better. That's all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of the case I put on. I'm proud of the way Braggs reacted to how I put on the case. So that was
Mm-hmm.
probably like the single most pressure packed moment I had felt.
Yeah. And obviously the agency business is famously known for being kind of tough and maybe sleazy, some people might say. How do you maintain your own integrity and kind of personal ethics in that type of environment? And can you kind of maybe describe an example of where your principles were tested and how you handled that?
Okay. Every single day of my career, from the first day to today and every day in between, my ethics are always challenged, okay? Because it's a very greedy, scummy, type of a business, okay, which is ruthless and people will stop at nothing. But I turned to how I was raised. I was raised to be honest by my parents, okay? So I believe you're either a crook or you're not a crook, okay? You're either going to steal and rip people off or you're not. So I've always operated with honesty and integrity. I might not have a filter. I'll talk to players and I'll tell them things that they might not want to hear from time to time. But as long as you operate and negotiate on behalf of your player as zealously as you possibly can, but with honesty and integrity, I always believe you'll end up on top. And that's what I've always used as a guiding principle when I've negotiated contracts and in my representation of players.
Is there a situation that stands out in that type of way?
Just not any one that I could point to. Just, but I would say every single one. Just some are bigger than others, but everybody's situation is akin to them and important to them. And I just, from the smallest deal to the biggest deal, and everyone in between, I conduct myself accordingly.
Can you talked about your first arbitration case you've ever had? Can you describe kind of your arbitration approach and how you prepare for those high stakes hearings and maybe share kind of an anecdote of a tough, particularly tough arbitration case where you had to get creative?
Well, I try to get creative in every single one. Um, in every case I've done, no matter how big or how small, or whether I've won or I've lost, I put the same amount of intensity into each one. The only thing that's different in each case is the numbers. Okay, whether you're doing $1 million case or $10 million case, it doesn't matter. That money is still very important to that player. And I think that, at least me, strategically, what I do is once I have a case, till I either win, lose, or settle that case, I'm replaying it over in my head over and over and over again, different scenarios. I'm rehearsing, I'm practicing. When I get around other agents in my office, I'll sit down in front of them and I'll say, okay, sit down and listen. This is how I'm going to do this part. This is how I'm going to argue that part. What do you think? Critique me. You think that's good? You think that's bad? You think I should change anything? Give me your input. And I do it to a variety of people that I respect their opinions on in that setting. And I think that fine tunes my analysis. It fine tunes my presentation. It fine tunes my argument, and it enables me to give the best possible performance that I possibly can when I'm presenting a case.
Are arbitration cases held online or are they in person only?
It's funny that you asked that. There's only 1 year that it was done by Zoom, much like how we're doing this podcast interview, which was during COVID. And I didn't have a case that went to trial during COVID. And I was extremely grateful that didn't happen. And the reason being is I've always felt, at least me, in my own particular style, is like I actually would prefer if you and I were in the same room right now and you were sitting right
Yeah,
across the table from me,
yeah.
rather than doing it by Zoom. I mean, I understand, the power of modern technology, and it's nice that you can be, in Texas and I can be in California and we can do a podcast interview. That's great.
Hmm.
Okay. But they were doing, during the COVID season, they were doing arbitrations by Zoom. Okay.
Hmm.
And I need to, when I'm presenting a case and I'm trying to be persuasive and I want to win over, there's 3 judges that are judging the case, and you obviously have to win 2 out of the 3 to win the
Yeah.
case. And I want to be in the room. I want to feel it in the moment. I want to sense it. I want to look into their eyes. I'm not saying that I can't look into your eyes as we sit here, but it's different if you're just sitting across the table from me than if you are in a Zoom setting. So I was actually fearful that I would have had to have done a case, during COVID
Yep.
by Zoom, where I would have to argue it in front of 3 judges, and it was all done by Zoom because I don't feel that I could be as good, me, okay, by doing it by Zoom as I could be as if I were actually there live and in person.
Hmm. Is there a deal that you signed, or is it there a deal that you got that is particularly memorable and you're particularly proud of because of something that happened?
Well, I've broken the salary barrier 7 times or so. I mean, I did it, with Saberhagen. I did it with Conseco, Bonilla, Bonds twice, Piazza, Pujols. So I've broken the salary barrier quite a few times during my career. I mean, each time was kind of rocked my world a little bit, but those players were well positioned at that time and well deserving of the amounts that they got. So I would probably indicate every single one of those times was a big deal. Um, Probably I think the first one was the 1990 deal I did with Conseco. At the time. It was the first post collusion because I remember I told you collusion was 86 through 89. His 1990 contract was a mammoth deal. It was like twice the size of anybody's contract in any sport. And
Mm-hmm.
I was 1 year out of law school, if you can imagine that. And here's Conseco making, I think we got him 5 years, 23.5 million with a $3.5 million signing bonus. He went on the Arsenio Hall show, and they made a big deal about that contract, and I was the one that did it, and I was very proud of that and very proud of that moment.
Mm-hmm. And then someone else notable that you represented was Ricky Henderson, and he obviously played till 44, and you kind of kept finding him opportunities to prove that he could play, later in his life. Can you share a story of maybe keeping Ricky in the game for nearly a quarter century? What were the conversations kind of like with teams who thought he was too old?
Yeah, Ricky, he just passed away this last year, and very, very sad about that. Ricky, for me, I mean, I loved representing Ricky. First of all, Ricky was a freak. Okay, you look at his body. I compare his body a lot to like Bo Jackson's body. He was a little bit smaller version of what Bo Jackson is, but you don't see many guys that are built like him. Okay, with power and speed and in the frame that he had. When he took his shirt off, I mean, it looked like he was chiseled out of granite. I mean, it was just unbelievable. And I would always talk to him about, okay, what are you doing working out wise? And he would tell me he'd do 1,000 push-ups a day, 1,000 sit-ups. I'm like, you're not getting your quads like that. They tell me he'd run sprints on the beach, and I'm like, you're living in Arizona, you don't live at the beach. But he was a workout fanatic. Mentally, I liked his mental approach to the game. He had a very, very high baseball IQ. He had a great sense of humor. He was very funny. And the thing about age, which is something that Major League Baseball, even to this day, they don't really understand, is they're going to look at your birth date and they're going to make judgments based upon how old you are, which I think is wrong. I mean, there are some guys who play better at 34 than they did at 24. Why? Okay. I mean, yes, their body is older. Yes, they're not going to recover as quick. I mean, those are just that's medically based. That's true, but maybe through experience or wisdom or knowledge that they've acquired along the way, they just perform better. So I think, at least what I would do if I were an owner looking at a player, I mean, obviously I'm not going to want to sign a 37-year-old to a 10-year contract like I would a 27-year-old. That wouldn't make sense. I get it. But I would go year by year, maybe a 2-year deal or whatever. But if you have an elite player or a player who's older, who's still playing at an elite level, okay, like Ricky was, you
Yeah.
keep giving him jobs. You
Yep.
keep giving him jobs until he can't play anymore because, in a case like that, major league pitchers would have told Ricky when he can't play anymore because when he couldn't get on base, he couldn't get a hit. That's when he tell you. And major league pitchers, their arms or whatever, sometimes you'll look at a pitcher, he's had a decline in velocity over the years, and they'll say, oh, that's because he's getting older. Well, what if he's still effective? I represented Johnny Franco. He has over 400 saves as a lefty closer. He never threw hard. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't matter. So I'm more result oriented like that than looking at a guy's age. I want to see how he's performing, and if he's older and he's still performing at an elite level, I would still keep giving him jobs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to switch it over to kind of you've represented a lot of players, that have been controversial. How do you navigate media storms or the public criticism, and how do you personally deal with times when the public opinion was against your client or even against you?
Yeah, the public is obviously a big factor, and I never lose sight of the fact that the public is the one who's paying the players, and the players are paying me. Okay, they're the customers. I get that. However, the public's perception of what reality is especially like if you want to talk about steroids or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
it is wrong. They're off
Mm-hmm.
base. And so my conversations that I have with the players have always been, I don't care what the public thinks. The public is free to think the way they want to think. And we're not trying to win any popularity contest here. You just go out there, go about your business, perform to the best of your your abilities, and just let the chips fall where they fall, and don't get distracted by, what John Smith public thinks about you. It's not important in the grand scheme of things. What you think about you, what your teammates think about you, what your coaches and your managers think about you is what's important, not what the public thinks.
What about when the public or anyone is kind of against you as opposed to your players?
I never care because they think that the agent is always at fault. The dirty, greedy agent is causing their player to leave their city, their franchise, to get his player more money some other place. But we have a job to do. We have a job to do is to represent the player, to get the player appropriately compensated. Maybe the player isn't happy playing in the city that he's playing in. So I follow the marching orders of the player, not the public.
Yeah. How have you obviously the game of baseball has changed, throughout the years. How have you, from the 80s, to the Moneyball era to now, and how have you adapted your strategy to kind of deal with things like the analytics or the salary cap or the luxury cap or even, the way teams value players that have evolved. How has your strategy changed, through when you started to now?
I like your question. I'll tell you why I like it. I like it because for me, okay, there's two things. Okay, there's the modern day analytics and how you look at a ball player, which you cannot ignore. A lot of it's very interesting. A lot of it's fascinating. But for me, there's also, it goes hand in hand with what I call the eye test. Okay, I often say at times, I can tell you if I like a guy by the way he walks on and off the bus. Okay, I can show you some guys who, from an analytical perspective, you would think, oh my, this guy is the best thing since sliced bread. And he simply can't throw, can't catch, can't hit. Okay. And other guys you'd look at and you say, this guy doesn't look like he's very athletic to me. I don't think he's that good, and just something about him where he can do it. Okay. So the answer to your question is I'm a both guy. I look at the analytics. I pick and choose what part of the analytics I like and I think is helpful and of note is interesting, and I analyze it and I digest it and I talk to the player about it. Okay. But by the same token, I like to see how a guy carries himself on and off the field, how he handles adversity, how he handles pressure. There's like a phenomenon out there. You'll take a player who feels that he's a little disgruntled by his former team, and then he's coming in to play against his former team.
Hmm.
And you see this guy perform like over his skis. How's that possible? Why does that happen? What is that phenomenon that's occurring there? There's like that X factor, that little something extra that you get out of that guy. Now, it'd be nice if you could show it all the time, everywhere.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe he has that little extra incentive in him because he feels like he's been disrespected by his former club, and he's going to come in there and he's going to show them why they made a mistake. Okay, whatever it is, but so to me, there's way more to it than just the analytical side of the game. Although I have a team of analytics guys and we fight back and forth all the time on guys for a variety of reasons. And it provides for interesting debate. But at the end of the day, I'm a both guy. I'm adapted to and deal with and handle the modern analytics, but I don't throw in the garbage the eye test and what I see and what I feel by just looking at a guy, talking to a guy. I mean, sometimes, like players now at the baseball combine, they go through interviews. To me, that's a big thing too, because I want to know what makes a guy tick. I want to listen to him speak. I want to see, does this guy have confidence? Where's he coming from? Where is he going to? Has he handled adversity in his life? There's so many things that go into it rather than just the pure analytical data. So I'm a both guy.
Do you think a younger agent that hasn't had as much experience as you has to rely more on analytics because his eye test isn't as good as yours?
I don't know. I don't know. It would depend on the individual agent. I think that my eye for talent is as sharp today as it was when I was a kid playing the game. I always felt I could look and say, "You're good. You suck. You have no chance. You're a future superstar." And yeah, of course, I've been wrong. Okay, from time to time, but um, I think that you either have an eye for that or you don't.
Do you think it's harder for agents to get great deals for players now compared to 20, 30 years ago?
I don't think it's the time. I think it's the individual agent. I think a lot of these guys can't negotiate their way out of a paper bag. They don't have the ability to do it. It's just because they just don't have it. You have to have a certain ability to be able to kind of roll with the punches, read the room, know when people are bluffing you, okay, when to call that bluff. I believe it's nothing you can learn in law school or anything like that. I believe it's the way it's in your DNA. It's the way you came out of your mother's womb as to
Yes.
whether or not you can handle in those types of situations as well. I often use the analogy. I speak oftentimes at law schools, and I talk about this because they always ask me, is there something, a skill you're going to learn or skill you're going to develop in law school? And I always say something like this. Back in the day, when you wanted to pick up on a girl, right? It wasn't like you guys in the modern day era where you're, swiping left, swiping right, doing all this stuff. You would have to approach somebody cold in a restaurant, at the beach, at a dry cleaner, in the supermarket, and ingratiate yourself to that girl right away. Hi, I'm Andrew. Yeah,
Mhm.
you want to grab a cup of coffee or lunch or
Yeah.
whatever, and
Yeah.
charm the pants off that person.
Hmm.
Uh, so there's so many intangible skills that go into that, and I just think it's the way you are as a person or you're not.
You think it's harder for an agent to become known in the industry today coming in as opposed to when you came in?
Well, when I came in, it was kind of like the Wild West, and it's a little bit more structured now. I think that if you came in, you got good players, those players stuck with you, you got good results, over time things would happen for you. But it's a very, very hard industry. I mean, when I go to the agent meetings every year, I'll look in the room and there'll be 300 agents in there and I'll recognize 10 of them.
Yeah.
Okay. People come and go in this industry all the time, and it looks very lucrative on the outside. It looks like there's a lot of sex appeal. You can make a lot of money. You can have a lot of fun. And it can be those things. It absolutely can be. But I think for the people who have been able to carve a living out of just doing that and only that, they're few and far between.
How has poker helped your negotiation skills and reading people?
I was actually just talking about this the other day. I think it's invaluable. I think that oftentimes when I say to people when I'm playing poker, I talk about they think it's a big deal, like they'll go into the think tank on whether or not they should make a call or a raise or bluff or whatever. And I go, this is nothing when you want to talk about the poker game of life. I'm sitting there and let's say I'm negotiating a contract for a guy who's never made any money before in his entire life. And the team wants to offer me, let's just say, 5 years, 5 million a year. If that's $25 million, and this guy comes from nothing. He grew up in a single wide trailer in Kentucky. Let's just say. I mean, I'm making up a composite of a player, and the player says to me, "That's more money that's in my entire town. I could buy the entire town I grew up in, and that's generational, life changing money. It'll pay for my great 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 grandkids. We got to take it." And I say to the player, you're not worth 5 years, 5 million a year, 25 million. Okay. You're more worth like 10 years at 12 million a year, 100, you're worth 120 million. We're going to give away $100 million, and then some people will say, and I remember I always refer to Albert Pujols in this situation because he actually taught me something. When we were taking him out of St. Louis, and the Cardinals had portrayed him as a villain, like a guy who greedy ball player, because they had offered him, I want to say, 200 million at the time. And how can he possibly leave you fans in St. Louis? He's being offered $200 million. He can't spend that kind of money in his life.
Hmm.
Pujols had a kid who had Downs. And I remember he said to me at the time, he wants every single penny he could get because he could take that extra money. Sure, that 200 million is enough for him to live whatever life he wants to live for the rest of his life. But he could take that extra money, and he was a very charitable person, and give that money to the Downs Foundation. And maybe one day that extra dollar that he had, that he gave, went to some researcher who discovered a cure. So
Mm-hmm.
anytime this is a perfect example of where the public is wrong. Okay, the public looks, oh, you greedy ball player, and then all the St. Louis fans, they were hating on Albert. How could you leave? You know, you greedy. What? Where you're going to go? You're going to go to the Angels for 250 million? Is that 50 million extra really going to make a difference in your life? The answer is yeah, it is going to make a difference. That's 50 more million that he could give to the foundation. So he chooses, right? Which could lead to that cure. So I'm from the Albert Pujols school of thought on that. Okay, it's get as much as you can whenever you can. It's nobody else's business. It's a very highly personal matter between the player and the club. So I hope that answers the question. I don't know if it did, but
Well, do you think that poker helped you get that extra 50 million?
well, I actually think that poker helps me in situations because you got to make reads. You know, you have to make reads on people. So when the general manager is telling you, hey, 25 million is all I got, right? And you're like, I know this guy's worth $100 million more than that, and I believe he's got more, and I believe he'll give me more, even though he's saying to me, I'm drawing a hard line in the sand right now. I'm not going over this. I'm going to retract, and I'm going to cut off all negotiations. And then the player, who's only making, let's say, the minimum salary at the time, is thinking to himself, my, I just pissed away $25 million. What if I get hit by a bus when I'm crossing the street tomorrow? I'm never going to see that money ever again. And although that player would be right, he would be accurate in what he's saying. He could be hit by a bus or a bolt of lightning or whatever and never see another dime. Okay, you really want to sell yourself for 20 cents on the dollar? You got to know what your worth is in this world and anything it is that you do, and go out and try to grab it.
Do you have a favorite poker story or a moment at the poker table?
Um, let me think. I mean, I've had quite a few moments. I came in second once in the NetJet poker tournament where I won 150,000. That was in a poker tournament, not in a cash game, and that was kind of fun and exciting. First place would have been 25 hours on a G4, which is what I really wanted. But I
Yeah.
ended up getting 150,000 for second place. First place at that time, the value would have been 250,000.
Mm-hmm.
But I would rather have had that, but come in first place. But it was an exciting moment for me in the poker world.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And is there a favorite, private game or house game that you've ever played in?
Yeah, I've played. I often tell this story too to people as well. I mean, I've played poker all over the world. I've played in casinos. I've played in home games, private games, and some of the people that you meet at the poker table are the biggest scumbags on the planet. And other times you meet some real business titans, and I've met some of my closest friends and people I do business with at the poker table. So people probably tell you the same thing about playing golf, right? They've
Mm-hmm.
played golf with people who they wouldn't want to spit on if they were on fire, and other people who they've struck very close personal relationships with or business relationships with. So it's probably like anything else in life. So you never know who you're sitting next to when you're sitting down at a poker table.
Yeah. You also recently did a job as a ski lift operator. How was there any situations where you had trouble, getting people on and off the ski lift?
No, I never had trouble getting people on and off the ski lift. I own a home up in Lake Tahoe, and one day when we were up there over the summertime, I noticed that they were hiring for lift operators. And I usually go to Tahoe from around usually Thanksgiving-ish till around the first of the year, except for the baseball winter meetings, which are the first week in December every year. So I go to that. But other than that, we're up in Tahoe for about a month. And because I'm up there, I can pick and choose the days I want to ski on. So I never want to ski on the weekends because it's always too crowded when I can ski during the week. And so when I get up there, I get a little bit of cabin fever. I like to get out and do something. So I thought to myself, you know what? It'd be nice if I could get a weekend job up there, 5 weekends in a row or whatever, and be a ski lift operator. So I applied for the job. I got to admit, I wasn't the prototypical type of ski lift operator. Most of these kids were 23 years old, 24 years old, out of college graduates, but they didn't want to start their real life. They were ski bums, and me. And so I applied for the job. I got the job, and yeah, I kind of stuck out a little bit like a sore thumb, but I loved it. I was out in the fresh air every day, and the benefits were great, and My cover got blown pretty shortly after I started the job, but it was a lot of fun. I wear that as a badge of honor, and I have a lot of shirts and stuff like that from Heavenly Valley, which is a ski resort that I worked at, and I really enjoyed my time as a ski lift operator.
Do you think you're going to do it again?
Yes, yes, I will.
Um, Also, you are, I guess, maybe known by some people in the office as a professional boat docker. Can you talk a little bit about that?
A professional what?
Boat docker, docking
But
boats.
I can only imagine where you got that information from. But I used to have my house is on the lake in Tahoe, and I have a dock in my backyard. And I actually made a mistake when I first got my boat, and I had a dock in my backyard. I had a single dock, so you had to park up against the one side like this, where a lot of people have V-shaped docks where you just drive the boat right into the middle like this, which is easier because it gives you a much greater margin of error. Because it's hard to have control of a boat when you're driving at very slow speeds. And when you're there coming into the back, in my backyard there, the wind can blow and a little bit of wind can put you off course. So it's hard to maintain control. But ever since I bought a V-shaped dock, I had my old dock taken out, a new dock put in. Now I don't have any problems with parking. Now I'm an expert now.
We also, I have an anonymous quote from someone in the office, and it's MC Hammer called and wants his pants back. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that's a.
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you about that. In the 1980s, okay, there was a company called Body Alive. They made workout type clothing for really big guys, and they did a deal with Conseco. Conseco was just, I mean, he was a monster. The way he was, I mean, you could look at photos of him in the '80s. And so we did an endorsement deal with this company, and Jose had unlimited apparel, whatever he wanted. So he gave me a bunch of stuff, and I still to this day I have it, and it's very comfortable clothing. It's very, I mean, you can I work out in it, or sometimes I sleep in it as pajamas. Okay, and and so when let's say I'm in the office for long stretches of time, when we'll say we're doing arbitrations and we're working round the clock, right? It's not like I'm going to put on a suit and tie and work 18 hours in a day writing up a case. So I want to be comfortable. So I put on what's called the Body Alive wear, which looks like pants that MC Hammer wore in his video in the 1980s.
That's a good story. All right,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to get into a little rapid fire question segment that our viewers like. Favorite sports movie of all time?
Oh, wow, there's a lot. Pride of the Yankees.
Why?
I liked Lou Gehrig's story. I respected him. The movie's in black and white. A lot of people from your generation, and I mean this as a put down, okay, don't know of that movie, and that's very upsetting to me. I mean, probably next to that, my next one would maybe be Bull Durham, but Pride of the Yankees is the best sports movie for me. But there's a lot. I have lots of favorite sports movies that I mean, it's hard for me. I might even be unfair to myself by just saying the Pride of the Yankees because
Mm-hmm.
even though maybe number one is number one by just a little bit, because
Yeah,
there's several that are number twos that are right on its
close.
heels.
Mm-hmm.
Several, yeah.
Is there a favorite ballpark that you have to watch a game or a stadium that holds a special place in your heart?
Yes, and it's Dodger Stadium, and I'll tell you why. And it's only Dodger Stadium, no other ballpark. Although I've been to other ballparks that I think are more glorious and more majestic than Dodger Stadium, but it's Dodger Stadium for me, and I'm going to tell you why. Because growing up as a little boy, all I ever wanted to do was play for the Dodgers. Okay, so what's interesting is to this day, like when players come into town and I take have lunch with them, I say to them, you want to take the bus to the ballpark, or do you want me to take you there? And half the time the players will say, I'll take the bus. The other half the time they'll say, oh, is it cool? Will you take me there? And I'll say, yeah. So I drive them to the ballpark. Now, nobody's getting in the ballpark when I'm getting there other than the players because it's closed
Mm-hmm.
off to the public at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, I'm taking the player there, so I'm getting in the ballpark. For just a few brief moments, I fantasize to myself that the player is not a passenger in my car, that he's not there, that I'm actually driving myself to the ballpark because I'm playing today. So for just those little 5 minutes as we're pulling into Dodger Stadium, okay, I'm feeling like I'm about to go to work, okay? And then when I pull up to the player's parking lot and the player gets out, my daydream, because I'm daydreaming, my daydream ends,
Uh-huh.
becomes a nightmare because I realize I'm not playing, he is, and I'm not. But for those few moments there, I pretend that I'm the one driving myself to work. So it's Dodger Stadium, and that's the only place. Doesn't
That's
have. I
awesome.
didn't grow up, even though growing up in LA, I didn't like the Angels because it was the American League. I didn't like the
Hmm.
DH, whatever. So I was not an Angel fan at all. So even though I do take players, same thing at Anaheim Stadium, I don't get that same warm fuzzy feeling that I do when I go up to Dodger Stadium.
That's awesome. Who was your sports idol growing up?
I don't know if I had any one idol in particular. I never really idolized anybody. I kind of liked Wilt Chamberlain on the Lakers. I still think he's probably the greatest basketball player of all time, and I'll argue that with anybody. Um, I don't think I had any one player in particular that I idolized. I looked up to, and I liked a lot of them based on their style of play. But there's not one that I could point to. But maybe Wilt Chamberlain in basketball.
What is your favorite off the field moment with a player?
Well, do you not count? Well, it was the Bonds breaking Hank Aaron off the field, or technically, I don't know.
Technically, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know. It was. I mean, I've never been on the field in that sense. I
Yeah.
mean, I didn't hit the home run, but he did bring me down onto the field and into the
Yeah.
clubhouse. So I don't know. I mean, I'd have to go with that moment.
What is your go-to meal on the road?
Well, it depends. It depends where I am, what I'm doing. I go in and out of phases when I try to eat really healthy. When you're on the road, you got to watch yourself. And then other times when I cut loose. My favorite meal of all time, still to this day, I often say to people, if you were going to the electric chair and they said, "What's your last meal? What would you pick?" And I'd pick a hot dog. Hot dogs are my favorite, smothered in onions, and that would be not my go-to meal, the meal that I might want the most, but not necessarily my go-to meal because I got to watch my hot dog consumption.
What is one trait every great agent needs?
The ability to have feel, to be able to read the room, understand, be a good listener when people are talking to you and they're saying one thing to you and knowing what the real intent is behind that. Being able to assess and judge situations like that and have a feel for what's right and what's not right. That's where most
If
guys fail. They're blatantly ignorant to what's right in front of their face. They don't see it, they don't sense it, they don't feel it, and they miscalculate situations, and that inevitably leads a lot of people to failure.
what is what do you prefer, negotiating or scouting talent?
They're different. I think it's hard to. I can't really say I prefer one above the other. I like doing both. Um, I never really thought about it that way. I like doing both. They're different. I think they're completely different.
Hmm.
I like judging talent, and I like to see if I can see things that other people don't see. Uh, I'm trying to pat myself on the back actually a little bit because I think at times I do see things that some people don't see. And in the negotiation arena, that's basically in everyday life. I mean, you could be
Yeah.
buying a car, or
Yeah.
talking a girl into going and having coffee with you, or talking a player into letting me represent them, or a team to give me more money. So it's different. I can't compare them. I like doing both.
If you had to make a total career pivot, nothing legal or nothing in sports, what would you be doing?
I'd be playing baseball.
Nothing in
I'd be a,
sports.
I'd be a major league baseball player. That's the only thing. When people say that's the only thing I ever decided I wanted to do,
Hmm.
and my mother, okay, this was I think the only time she ever lied to me in my life. She said, Jeffrey, you can do anything you want in this world, and I believed her. So I said, okay, I want to be a baseball player, but that's a lie because you can't. Okay, it's not for everybody. So I had the heart, I had the desire, the passion, whatever, but I lacked the talent.
What is a book you recommend to young professionals?
Uh, I'll tell you exactly. Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. He's written a series of books, but just his
Hmm.
first one, the very, very
Hmm.
first one. Rich
Hmm.
Dad, Poor Dad.
What's one city you love traveling to for work that might surprise people?
You know, I, I'll tell you what's interesting about that. I actually really enjoy almost all the cities that I visited. I've actually baseball's taken me pretty much around the world. I just don't like getting on an airplane, checking
Yeah.
into a hotel, renting a car. That component to it, I don't like. But
Hmm.
other than that, I have enjoyed something in almost every city I've ever been to, and I make a point of when I go to some city. I mean, most cities I've been to over and over and over again. But if I'm ever going to a new city or whatever, I like to read up about it. What's in the city that makes it tick? What are they known for? What are the people here? Are they all about? Whatever. Where's the hot local restaurants? What is the best food that the city has to offer? And I try to take that in wherever it is that my travels have taken me over the course of my.
This is my last question here. I like to ask this to all of my guests that I have on. You've seen so many people chase this industry. Some people make it, some don't. What to you separates the ones who succeed from the ones who fade out or give up? And what advice would you give to young people trying to break into, whether it's the agency business or just sports in general?
It would be, and I have this conversation with my son too, that in life you need to be a savage. The younger generation today, I don't see a lot of savages out there. I want a guy who takes no prisoners. I don't want a guy who's going to cheat and take shortcuts either. Okay. But I want a guy who's willing to go balls to the wall, let it all hang out there, no matter what, take no prisoners, and outwork, outthink, out hustle the other guy. It doesn't matter what it is. If you were opening up a restaurant, I would use those exact same words with the exact same advice. Opening a restaurant, okay, a dry cleaner, being a sports agent, being a orthodontist, it doesn't matter. I would say if you apply yourself in that sense and in that capacity, you will reign above whoever your competition is.
Great. I love that answer. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and that's it for this episode. That was Sports Business Unplugged. Make sure to check us out on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and you can check out my LinkedIn at Andrew Sachs. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.